So it is time for our very first session of the day, and that is our Tenant Power in Action session. And I am absolutely sure that any of you in this room today could be sitting on this panel. So I recognize that there's great power in the room, there's great wisdom in the room, there's great experience in the room. To sort of capture that, we have invited a number of our tenant leaders who we'd like to spotlight in this session, who are using the power of media, the power of organizing, the power of advocacy to affect change. We want you to learn about how they are doing this work in Washington, New York, Virginia, Florida. Much of it will mirror your own, and how they are preparing and empowering tenants to enter contested spaces, advocating for more effective housing programs and policies, and holding policymakers accountable for the communities that they serve. To join us this morning, we have Danny Barber, who's in the back. Let's welcome Danny Barber. He is president of the Citywide Council of Presidents and a resident of New York, New York. We've got Ms. Joy Johnson. Let's welcome Joy Johnson. The founder and chair of Charlottesville's Public Housing Association of Residents, a former board member of the coalition here, and a resident of Charlottesville, Virginia. If you would come, we want you to come on up. Now, it says that we have Rachel Johnson, but instead we actually have Mindy Woods. So let us welcome Mindy Woods. Who is a member leader of the Resident Action Project and a board member of the coalition. She's also a resident of Seattle, Washington, and she will be joining our panel this morning. And lastly, we have Ms. Geraldine Collins, who is our moderator. She is the executive director of the National Alliance of HUD Tenants, and she is a board member of the coalition, and she resides in New York, New York. So everybody, we've got a great panel for you today and a wonderful moderator to get us started. Let us greet them this morning. Good morning. Yes, yes. Are you ready? No, you're not ready. So I'm going to ask you that again. I'm going to say, are you ready? You're going to say, we ready? Are you ready?
We ready.
There you go.
I love the accent.
Ooh, you got it. Good morning, Washington, D.C. Are we excited or what? Aren't we glad that we're here today and not below ground? So that's something to be thankful for. So I welcome everyone that's here today to this session. This is the Tenant Power in Action, and these tenants has gone far and near to do advocacy work. During the pandemic, they went through a lot, and they still were able to organize. So I'd like to recognize at this moment Ms. Joy Johnson from Charlottesville, Virginia. Mr. Danny Barber from New York City, well known as the Boogie Down Bronx. And Mindy Williams from Seattle, Washington. Last but not least, again, my name is Geraldine Collins, and I am the Executive Director of the National Alliance of HUD Tenants, which we represent over 1.2 million HUD tenants across the country. And I will tell you a little bit more about that later. But I'd just like to know you, when I started my advocacy work in the 80s, I worked at an organization in Harlem, New York, called Harlem Urban Development Corporation. And we built houses, high-rises, for low-income families. And ever since then, I've been doing housing work. Well, I've been doing housing work before then because my father was a construction worker, and we had to do sheetrocking, we had to do bricklaying, so I learned a lot from my father. And then he always told me, he says, If you can help someone along the way, then your living will not be in vain. And I continue to do the work that my father has instilled in me. And these organizers today, they will say the same. And I have a talk show in Harlem at a city college called Ask Geraldine. And it's on every Monday from 5 to 6 p.m. And it's about all facets of housing. So we will talk about that a little later also. So right now, I'm going to give the floor to Ms. Joy Johnson to tell about how she got into advocacy and what she's doing in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Hello, everyone. Hello. All right, all right. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So, my name is Joy Johnson. I was born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica. So I lived in Brooklyn, New York, Flatbush, New York for 1 year, and then they sent me to Charlottesville, Virginia. So as a child, it was like a culture shock. So moving on, my advocacy started from Head Start, where I was involved in the parent committee. And then from that, somebody saw something in me who kept nudging me to go to these conferences or go to something. So I took advantage. So I'm a kind of person like a sponge. If I see something I'm interested in, I'm going to keep sucking it up, sucking it up, sucking it up. And so I was all over the place. It was about Head Start, it was about housing, it was about school or whatever. I finally had to get to a point where I had to figure out which was my niche. My niche was, I lived in public housing. There were things that wasn't going right in public housing, so that's where I was going to start from. One of the things that somebody said yesterday about organizing is about you got to do your homework by knowing the regulations. I had an opportunity to come to a conference where, and I'm going fast, you can ask me a question later. I have an opportunity where I went to a conference in D.C., and it was during the Jack Kemp era. I met Bertha Gilkey. I met Martha Johnson. I met Kimmy Gray. I met all these pioneers of public housing, so it made the work that I was doing look like I wasn't doing nothing. Because these were powerful women and men who were in Congress fighting for 964 for people to be able to organize. And that got me intrigued. From that, it led me into being on a board with the Center for Community Change, which invited me to be able to get connected with the coalition. And then when I got connected with the coalition, I learned what was happening all across the United States, and that it was the same, but it was just in a different chapter. And so I had to learn about what other folks was going through so I could take it back home and use it in Charlottesville. At the end of the day, what I learned about organizing is that 99% of organizing, that 1% of following up with people is what make organizing successful. So I can do anything that I want to do. I can go do door knocking, but if I come in, what's your name, baby? Hey, Sunshine. But if I was to knock a Sunshine door and I took up 5 minutes of her time and I said, Miss Sunshine, I'll be back to see you on Tuesday. And then when Tuesday come, I don't go back and see Miss Sunshine, guess what? I just lost her. I just lost her. And in organizing, some of us don't follow up. We show up, but we don't follow up. So it's a mixture of things. And then the last thing I will share with you all, I had the opportunity to meet a young man, a young person, and his name was J.R. Flemings. And Bertha was highlighting how they got to know the regulation. And it was through rapping. It was through music. They took that 24 CFR and said, here, rap about it. And that was how they were organizing. So I took that idea back home and tried to use it. So for me, networking when I come to these conferences, staying in touch with people. So it's a lot. I don't want to take up a whole lot of time. I hope I'm making sense because I am rushing through what you are, what I'm saying, but I want to be able to make sure Danny have, and he's part of my, yeah, go ahead and tell him the story.
One of my mentors. Growing up in the South Bronx, I worked for I grew up as a Salvation Army kid.
Oh.
I used to have this thing in my head that I was going to be the first black general of the Salvation Army and run it internationally. So I grew up as a kid in the Salvation Army. I worked for them. First job I ever had. Only job I ever had. 1998, it came to an end where I had a massive heart attack. Wound up leaving the Salvation Army, went into a major depression. What am I going to do with my life? What am I going to do with my time? The only thing I know how to do is fight for people. So I was in the wrong place at the wrong time and got arrested. So I believe in God. He's the head of my life in all aspects. So I never prayed so hard. My mom, I called home, and my sister said, your mother said she know you in jail. I said, you told her? She said, no. She said, you ain't been away from home for 30 minutes without calling her 90 times, and you ain't called her once. So she said, if you believe it in your heart and you confess it with your mouth, it shall come to pass. Mm-hmm. And I read that with the whole dorm that night. And that Wednesday, that week and a half was the longest time and the only time I spent, thanks to the New York City Department of Corrections. And they say never, I ain't never going back.
I heard that.
Ain't for me. So with that, so it was, my parents said, well, God has a mission for you. And if you choose to take it, that's the only way you're going to get out of that. Or the judge said if you're convicted, which you probably will be, you'll get 60 years in the penitentiary. So I jumped on the first one. I said, God, I'm willing to serve you and only you, and I'll do this. So I said, what is it that I have to do? My mother said, you're going to run for the Tenant Association. And that was in 2000. I was elected the vice chair. The president had a massive heart attack and died. I moved up, and I've been doing it ever since. They used to tease me, you killed the president so that you could get there. That wasn't true. So I like what I do because it's the opportunity that gave me a home when we were displaced when I was 2 years old. We got relocated to move into the Andrew Jackson houses where I've lived for 51 years. My dad worked for NYCHA. My mom was a community activist. So I ran with it. As the citywide chair for the New York City Housing Authority, sitting back and looking, the first move that the residents did was we filed a lawsuit in state court. We filed the Article 78, and it was incorporated with another case that was going on, the Baez case about children dying of lead poisoning in public housing. So the cases came together to get us a federal consent decree with a federal monitor from HUD, and that introduced New York City public housing to Mr. Gregory Russ, who came in with the plan that they were going to create a third-party trust entity, a new board, and this new board would hire the New York City Housing Authority to run its day-to-day operations. So the Citywide Council of Presidents, Executive Board, which is a new board, and some of the members are here, Ms. Kiko Charles, Ms. Aixa Torres, I just saw them come in. And before I go any further, New York City, please stand up.
Yeah.
York is in the house.
I promised Renee Willis that I would bring New York back to the table. There was, for the last, say 5 years, 6 years, New York was only here with a cutoff of 10 individuals. I think this year we have over 100 plus individuals. So what we've done is the Citywide Council of Presidents, the Executive Board voted not to move forward with the trust legislation.
Go ahead.
So we're supposed to choose members for an executive board. So no one from New York City knows this. So on the train ride yesterday coming down, I went to sleep because of an email that I got. The email came from HUD and NYCHA that I must, I will, and I shall, we all know those words, select 4 members for the trust board. I responded, I will not, I shall not send any names for the trust board. I simply have one last question, and then I'm going to turn it over. How can the residents, 1.5 million people, they've been stuck on 400,000 for the last 30 years. How can 1.5 million people honestly trust you to do the right thing, but when you were the sole proprietor, you did nothing right for the residents of public housing? Nothing.
Well, those are hard acts to follow, but I'm Mindy Woods. I live just outside of Seattle, Washington, the other Washington. And I am the oldest of three girls, and I remember when I was 5 years old, my dad left, and my mom sat me up on the kitchen counter, and she just said, you know, are you my big girl? And I said, yep. And she goes, as my big girl, can you be my helper? And I said, yep, and I had no idea what I was saying yep to. So what she proceeded to tell me was that Daddy wasn't coming home anymore, and she had to go to work. And she needed me to help with my 2 younger sisters. We're all 2 years apart, so that was a 1-year-old, 3-year-old, and a 5-year-old as a single mom. And I just saw my mom, you know, do what many moms in this room and dads do every day, and she hustled. And she went to work, she got up early, she, you know, got us ready, she took my little sister to daycare, and my middle sister and myself, we stayed home for 1 hour, and there was a local morning show called JP Patches. And at 8:30, JP Patches would say, okay, it's 8:30, and would show the clock. And that's my cue to turn off the TV, lock up the door, and then we would walk 3 blocks to kindergarten. And my middle sister went to the preschool there. And, you know, that's just kind of how I grew up. We just, you know, you did what you had to do. And, you know, I was a latchkey kid, all the things, right? My mom was, she was so proud, and she wouldn't go to the food bank. And I remember that the doorbell rang one day, and she and I were in the kitchen, and we went to the door, and there was 2 bags of groceries and nobody in sight. So the neighbors knew my mom was too proud, but they could see that my mom was dropping weight rapidly. And I remember we had rice for breakfast and lunch, and we called it special rice, and we'd put the powdered milk in, and we put a little bit of cinnamon and a little tiny pinch of sugar, because that's all we could afford. And it was special rice, right? So even to this day, at 57 years old,
Rice cereal.
I still like my special rice. It brings back good memories. Although now I put real milk in it. Anyway, so I at 29 years old, I felt a calling, and I was sitting at an intersection on a lunch break and at a red light, and I heard that silly song, Proud to be an American. And it was right when we were in Desert Shield, and the conflict with Iraq, was amping up. And I heard that song, and something just spoke to me. Do something bigger than yourself. And I looked across the street through the intersection, and there was a military recruiting center. And I drove to it, and I said, that's it. I'm going to go sign up for the Air Force, and I'm going to fly airplanes, because I always wanted to be an astronaut. And so I marched in there and walked into the recruiting center and went to the Air Force office, and there was a big sign on the door, out to lunch, be back in an hour. I said, well, there goes my dreams. And so I looked to the right, and there was the Army Center, and I was like, nope. And then I looked to the next to that, and it was the Marines, and I said, hell no. And then I looked next to them, and there was these two guys sitting there in the Navy office. And I walked in, and I walked in, and an hour later I walked out having taken a test and scored a 93 out of 100, and they were like, where are you going? I said, I got to go back to work, lunch is over. They're like, but no, we need to talk to you. So they pursued me for a week and wore me down, and on Halloween Day in 1989, I enlisted in the U.S. Navy. And I enlisted in a 6-month delayed entry program, though, because we had a family trip to Hawaii for Christmas to go see my little sister who lived there at that time. And I said, once I'm done with the trip, then I'm yours. And so we went to Hawaii and came back, and it was January, and they hadn't called me, so I was just, I was working at an office. I was the receptionist, and we had a conference room with a big screen TV, and the conflict was really amping up. And so we were all huddled in the conference room watching Scud missiles going across the sky and all this stuff, and we were all like, we're going to end up in war, And all of a sudden, breaking news, and President Bush came on and said, I know, that's how I felt. He was like, we have officially declared war on Iraq. And everyone stopped, and we were just like, oh my God, what does this mean? And my boss at the time looked at me and he said, you're going to go there? I said, well, I don't know. And the phone rang, and I was the receptionist. I ran to answer the phone, and it was the Master Chief calling, saying, you're being called up. Plane leaves in the morning. So I went back in the conference room, and I said, okay, I got to go. And they're like, okay, have a good lunch. And I said, no, I got to go. And so we all, tearfully said our goodbyes, and I went home and packed up and went to the motel by the airport and left the next day. And that war was over by the time I was, middle of boot camp. So luckily I didn't have to go there. But I did 3 years in the military. But 2 weeks before my ship was going over to the Persian Gulf, my mom called, and she had called the Master Chief, and I was in taking a test. And as soon as I put my pencil down, they tapped me on the shoulder and pulled me out in the hallway, and they said, your mom is going in for a craniotomy biopsy, and we have a plane leaving. We're taking you to the airport. So they already had my bag packed. Took me to LAX, and I flew home. And the next day, my mom had surgery, and it was lung cancer that she had metastasized. And so she had 8 tumors in her brain. They were inoperable. So it was terminal. And the doctor came in her room, and he said, who's the one in the military? I need to talk to you out in the hallway. Well, 15 people are in her room, and everyone's like listening. They're all literally at the door like that. And he said, I don't know what you need to do, but she's got about 2 months to live. So you need to go AWOL or whatever you do, however you get out of the military. Well, you don't get out of the military. When you have signed that contract, you don't get out. My mom heard him, and she called me back in the room, and she said, nobody tells me when my expiration date is. There's only one individual tells me. So she had me write a list of things that she wanted to see accomplished before she would even entertain the thought of giving in. And the last thing on the list was to see my little sister either get her GED or some kind of certificate and do something. My sister had already been kicked out of 2 high schools, and she was really struggling. So I'm the older sister. I'm the second mom in the family. So I was like, all right, I got a mission, another mission. My first mission was I had to go to the Persian Gulf. And I remember we were out in the middle of the sea, and we got a message, a Red Cross message. And where we were in the middle of the Indian Ocean, it was sporadic communications. And so the message came with a bunch of blanks in the middle of it. And what it basically said was, Your mom, life expectancy unknown. So we didn't know if she'd passed. We didn't know anything. It was another week before we hit land, before I was able to get to a phone, and my mom answered when I called. And what she was telling me, thank you, what she was saying is that she had done an experimental trial, and it had actually shrunk the tumors. And so 6 were gone, and 2 were just little pea size. So I finished my military time. I did get out a year early when my mom's tumors did start to grow back. And I was able to come home and be with her last 14 months of her life. And, I was holding her when she passed over. And so after that, I was lost, like you're talking about. I just didn't know what I was supposed to do with myself. I felt like my purpose was gone, because my purpose had been taking care of my mom for 14 months. And then I found out I was pregnant. And so I remembered a conversation before my mom passed, just a few days before, and I said, I have always wanted to be a mom, and you have been such a great example for me. And what if I don't find a partner? How would you feel about that? And she said, I would hope that you have a partner, because it's hard work, but I know that you will make an amazing mom regardless of the circumstances. So when I had my son, it was just he and I, and we struggled a little bit. I struggled to keep that roof over our head, but I hustled like my mom. I had that great example, and I kept things going until we were in an apartment that we started to smell some funny smells, and I couldn't identify what that smell was. And I had been diagnosed with some autoimmune diseases, and I was unable to work. And so I started a house and pet sitting business. And so every time we left and we would go to somebody else's house, we felt great. And then we would come home, and within hours, we had bloody noses, joint aches, headaches, confusion, stomach aches, just the list went on. And it started to become evident after a couple more times of leaving the house and then coming back after a house-sitting job, that the smell smelled like a loaf of moldy bread. And it started to dawn on me. I said, I think we've got a mold issue. But I couldn't see anything. There was nothing happening visually, but I could smell it. And my son had also been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And if you know anything about diabetes, whenever you get sick, your blood sugars go up, and that's when, really bad things can happen. And he was starting to get so sick that he missed so much school that they sent a tutor to the house and said, just stay home, and we'll just send the tutor to you. Well, unbeknownst to us, home is the very place that was hurting us. So the more we were there, the sicker we got. And I remember one day I was really struggling to even complete a thought. And I was laying on the couch, and all these thoughts were swirling through my head. And my son was playing a game on the computer, and I said, look, go on the engine search. We didn't have Google then. Go up and look if there's such a thing as mold poisoning. And he looked it up, and the very first thing he said, yeah, actually, Mom, there's this thing called black mold poisoning. I said, read the symptoms. Everything he read is what we were experiencing as secondary black mold poisoning. In the 3rd stage, it's coma and death. So we had everything in secondary black mold poisoning. So I was at that point, I was a pissed off mama bear. I was like, who do I need to call? Somebody needs to come, take care of this. And so I called everybody I could think of, every inspector, housing authority. I was in a housing authority owned building. I called the housing authority. They were like, no, we don't have issues there. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And I even called the EPA, the American Lung Association, the American Cancer Association, American Heart Association. I called everybody. I didn't know, who else to call. And we finally had somebody come and do an inspection, and what they said is I had a leaky toilet and there was mold in the bathroom, but that didn't explain everything else. But they did come and they cut out the drywall behind the toilet, and I was there, and the guy brought me into the bathroom to show me, and the insulation was black fuzz. And I said, okay, now you know, right? Like, we're not making this up. And he said, yeah, okay, and I'll put the new drywall up. And I said, when you take the insulation out, right, and put the new insulation in? And he goes, well, no, the work order only says drywall. I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. So we ended up I ended up contacting a HUD attorney who said if they don't remediate the mold correctly, you don't pay rent. So I didn't pay rent for 4 months, and they tried to evict me. And the day I got to eviction court, I came in, and the courthouse had a little security scanner, and I brought a video camera. And the guard said, what's that for? And I said, and I looked over and I see the shady attorney, the sketchy landlord, and the maintenance man. And they're all standing over there. And I said, it's my evidence. And they all turned and looked at me. And so they scanned my video camera and they handed it to me. And as soon as they handed it to me, I get tapped on the shoulder from the attorney. He said, can we go over here and talk privately? They did not want that videotape going into those judges' chambers because I had videotaped 13 of my neighbors' apartments anonymously and had it, you know, that experience showed me that, okay, I was resourceful. I had a mom that, never quit fighting. I knew that I had, I had this child that was God gifted to me, and it was my job to protect him. So I was going to do everything I could to protect him. But when I looked around at my neighbors, many who English was not their native language, who were scared and terrified to even bring up the mold growing all over their walls, it looked like Art Deco, some kind of thing. I mean, it was crazy to see how much mold was growing and to know that the ambulances were coming onto our property every week, taking another kid to the hospital, or somebody else with blue lips, or somebody else with bloody nose that didn't stop bleeding for hours and then they were passing out because they'd lost so much blood. My son did end up in the hospital for 4 days with mold growing in his esophagus, with his diabetes numbers off the charts. So I knew that this was something I had to do that was bigger than me. And that's where we ended up in a shelter, in a YWCA shelter. And we had weekly meetings, and we went to our weekly meeting. I went to the meeting, and another organization came in and said, there is a bill in our legislature that was due to sunset or end, and that would cut 70% of the funding of shelters in our state. And was there anybody who would volunteer to go down to Olympia to tell their story? And I'm like, sign me up. So they helped me write my little testimony, and I went and did my 3 minutes, and it made a difference. And that's where I started with my advocacy. And I recognized there are many people, we all have a voice. Whenever someone says, I'm speaking for someone who doesn't have a voice, everybody has a voice. It's just whether or not they're in the position to use it. They're in they have the energy or the mind space or the confidence to use it. And so I knew I had to speak for those neighbors back at that complex until they were able to speak for themselves. And so I've just been fighting ever since. And I remember in my state, we have an organization that's one of the state partners of the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And I went to the executive director and I said, how do I get on that board? I want to be on the national board. And she said, well, let me talk to them and I'll put your name in. And so right before the pandemic hit, I got to be on the National Low Income Housing Coalition board. And so I'm just honored. Thank you.
What a tremendous stories we've heard this morning. Piggybacking off what Mindy just said, everyone in this room have a voice. So use that voice when you need to use that voice. And we need to use it all the time. Everything you do, document. Document everything that you do when you're trying to bring your landlord to court, when you have a disagreement with your management. Document everything. Just don't do it verbally. Document everything. I want to ask a question of everyone in the room. At a raise of hand, how many people in the room has heard the word RAD?
And I can tell you.
So everyone knows what that means.
Yep.
So this question is going to be posed to Mr. Barber,
Oh, I missed Johnson.
which New York City has the largest amount of public housing in the United States. Mr. Barber,
You forward it.
how do you feel about the RAD?
Hate it.
Give me a little bit.
Hate it.
We fought it.
Huh?
We fought it.
Well, we've been fighting it.
We won.
I have a young lady that's sitting in the audience named Miss Maria Forbes. She's from a development called Claremont Consolidation. She was a development that's going up for RAD conversion. Maria said it's 7 developments, so it's 7 different presidents. Not everybody fight as hard as everybody.
That's right.
So Maria truly exercises her voice. Sometimes we say, Maria, sit down, you exercising too much. but, like someone just said, it's no such thing as exercising too much. Sometimes in life, you have to become a repetitive messenger as well as being a credible messenger to get the message across. So Maria's one of those developments that went out and got legal services. Maria was supposed to have been converted 2 years ago. 3 years ago. They're still fighting. They're still Section 9. As Ms. Geraldine said, if we talk on the phone, send an email 2 seconds later, as per our phone conversation, and bring up points of the conversation. Always CC yourself so that you get a copy of it. And when people get emails, they tend to look at all the people in the email chain. So when they see that you CCing yourself, you have a mental note that you can always go back into when you type in the search, the email, like the keywords in the email, RAD, it'll pop up. We're fighting this. What works in one place doesn't always work in another.
Yeah. So,
Ms. Joy, okay.
okay, so, God put you in places that you don't know why you're there. And then sooner or later, something happened and you're like, oh. So, I had the opportunity to be in a workshop that was talking about how you change public housing, dismantling public housing. And that was through that was through Hope 6. And this gentleman from Harvard study, it's called the Harvard Cost Study, look it up. They were talking about how you're going to change public housing, how you're going to privatize public housing. And everybody in the room, I was listening, that's why I was there. I didn't know what I was into. They were saying what worked for Chicago won't work for Charlottesville. What worked for New York won't work for Atlanta. It's apples and oranges. And so the formula that you're coming up with is not going to work. Fast forward, this person got hired to work in OMB. And that's when the changes came down about how you was going to, since Hope 6 didn't work, they was going to do Choice Neighborhood. Choice Neighborhood didn't work, so they figured they was going to do now what it's called?
RAD.
RAD.
Rental
Remember what I
Assistance
said?
Demonstration.
Yeah, because everything they were coming up with, the residents, New York was a part of it, Chicago was a part of it, Atlanta, all the residents were in the room saying, this is not going to work. So when RAD, they were ready to implement RAD, I had already started saying to the folks in Charlottesville, RAD is not good because here's what I'm learning. So when our executive director, who hated residents, decided she was going to have RAD, I was able to get legal aid and give him all the documents, told him about the Harvard Cost Study, and said, look, you need to look at this. We don't want RAD in the city of Charlottesville. We were able to get legal aid. We were able to get the Housing Law Project and all to be able to fight us to stop bringing RAD to the city of Charlottesville. So we were the only resident organization in the United States who fought RAD and won. We were like, no. So what we decided that we wanted to do, we know our public housing needed to be rehab. So we decided, and I don't know how many of you remember what happened in Charlottesville on August 11th and 12th. And what happened in Charlottesville got a whole lot of people angry. You see, please y'all don't take this personal when I'm about to say this. I love it when white folks get mad. I love it when white folks get mad because most of those white folks were developers and they got angry because of what was happening. This was our opportunity. Audrey, Charlottesville, can you just raise your hand or stand? These are my board members. Some of them. So we were able to find a developer who I was always hackling him, like, when you gonna build some affordable housing? Define affordability. And I finally said to him, when are you, I saw him in the hallway and I said, when are you gonna do some development for low-income people? And he said, how can I help? And I said, oh, let's get a meeting together. We got a meeting together with Legal Aid, my board, CRHA, and some other funders, and said, here's what we would like for you to do. We know that our senior building, raise your hand, Miss Alice and Harriet, they are the chairs and the board members of our senior building. It was falling apart. Elevators wasn't working, this wasn't working, the whole 9 yards. So we had them in the room, and the developer said, we're gonna help you to raise money. He got the Dave Matthews Band to donate $8 million to us to do redevelopment in our public housing. And what we did, it sort of looked like RAD, but it don't taste as bad as RAD. We built, thanks to JR, who came and helped us, a private-public partnership. Even though you got to watch that sometime, but a private-public partnership where we have public housing units, project-based voucher, and tax credit units in the building. Our senior, our first development, we have 63 new units and 105 rehab units, the senior building. And so the first two, Miss Audrey, raise your hand. That's my partner in crime right there. We don't always agree, but she always listened to me and we're down with it and we come to a common ground of how we move forward on behalf of the resident. Because it ain't about us, it's about the people who doesn't have a voice. It is not about us. I really don't have to live in public housing, but I stay in public housing because I want to vote. So anyway, she has now moved into one of the two new housing, and they're building a third. And the senior rehab building is slated to y'all moving in May, Miss Alice? April, next month. And then now we're doing 6th Street and then we do another. So the public partnership, there is a commitment from that developer. Now, do I trust him 100%? No. And here's the sweetness of it, because he likes Audrey, because she wants a penthouse.
Okay.
Is that the development fee he's not taking. You know what he's doing with it?
Giving it to the association.
He put it right back into the association so that we can continue redevelopment.
Could you please?
Thank you.
Could you please tell the audience what are the development fees?
The development fee is what the developer walk away with.
So in NYCHA, I'm gonna put another resident leader on the site. So they working in New York. They working. Princella Jameson from the Millbrook houses. Ms. Jameson called me to a meeting about 5 years ago. Mr. Barber, I'm gonna wrap it up with this. Mr. Barber, they got developer fees. And the developer and NYCHA split it. NYCHA and the developer was gonna split about 20-something
Oh,
million.
big money, big money.
So Ms. Jameson said, why can't those funds come to the resident association?
can.
Because if you look at the language in the law, it states the money's supposed to go to a not-for-profit to rebuild and invest in the community where the development is taking place.
Amen. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. We're going to open the floor up right now for some questions. And before that, I'd like to recognize some key people in the room. Rachel Johnson from Florida, which was supposed to be on this panel. And she's a diehard advocate. And also, I saw come in the room Honorable Carmen Quiones from New York, which is a big RAD advocate. I'd like to recognize her. So at this time, I'm welcoming questions from the floor.
Oh, she said shout out JR.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. J.R. Flemings from Chicago. Chi-town. I'm sorry. See, that's what happens when you start calling out names. So we're going to receive questions from the floor at this time. And from the virtual people online.
Good morning, honorable family.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Very proud of the work that all of you are doing in this effort. A key question that I want to ask is, can someone tell me how many resident commissioners do you have sitting on your housing authority commissions?
So we basically fought in our city to dismantle the housing authority board that they had because it was 5 city councilors. And then we changed the ordinance. We fight to change the ordinance to make absolutely sure it is only 1 city council who now sits on the housing authority board, 2 current public housing resident, 1 Section 8 resident, and private citizen. And so that is still in effect. So we have actually 3 residents, but 2 has to be a current public housing, 1 Section 8. And if we can't find a Section 8 resident, we find somebody who has, some living project base or whatever. So we have 2. Audrey is a former commissioner, and I am a former commissioner.
Well, in New York, our mayor decides, so they have 2 residents that are resident board members. But as a resident association, we have our current chairman of the board is a resident right now. Because we got, okay, don't assault me. We had Gregory Russ. Yeah.
Oh, Lord.
We had Gregory Russ as our chairman, but once they created this trust legislation that I referred to earlier, they have to create a new board. So Gregory Russ, in his 3-year tenure, $1.2 million was his take-home salary. He was being switched to part-time, which meant he only got a $250 stipend, so he left. So,
Yes.
yeah.
So now I'm not sure how. I know in Charlottesville and what works in Charlottesville don't always work somewhere, but is it possible that you can look at the city ordinance to see how you could organize around that to change that?
Well, under that new trust legislation, we supposed to have 4 members,
So
but the mayor still picks. So in New York City, being a different monkey, however it goes, if it's not chosen by the residents and residents chosen by the residents for the residents, however you look at it, the mayor is always going to stack that board to go in his or her favor, no matter what you do, whoever you put there. We can put 1,000 people. As long as he puts them there, they are at the behest of him. And once a little bit of money come in the equation and an inch of power, you forget where you come from.
And part,
Next question.
okay, yeah, go ahead.
Next question. Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Laura, you can unmute now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I want to ask this of the three panelists. In New Jersey, one of the problems around all the mold in buildings is that there are no mold laws. In Washington, New York, and Virginia, are there mold laws, and do they help?
No. This is New York. No. There are laws. The laws were created under the bias. Lead, mold, and all of that. We have an omnibus, a mold person. We have a whole unit just strictly for mold and remediation. They are behind by 3 years, and that's just going to test. That's not going out to remediate. In order to get your apartment on the list expedited, you have to have an email sent to the person that run the unit, and not giving myself any credit, you should put Danny Barber in the email. Danny Barber and I had a conversation, and Mr. Barber told me to reach out to you, and he's in the email as well, and you'll probably get a visit that afternoon with someone coming to test your apartment, and 2 days later coming to remediate, excuse me.
Okay. I think we have time enough for maybe 2 more questions, and we have to wrap it up.
Good evening. My name is Maddie Henderson. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Guys, don't laugh, but I am the president of my building. I'm a board member, and there's something, I need help with this. There's something going on in my building with the mold, the breathing, the ventilation system, and I keep speaking and speaking and speaking, and I am getting no place. To people we have, I've been there for 13 years, and we have 13 vacancies, and I'm wondering, why is nobody moving in here? I know that there's a mold problem with my unit. I keep asking and asking, where do I go from here? I don't know what to do.
Health
I
department.
need help.
HUD will be here later on in the week, and I think that's a great question to pose to Secretary Fudge. Okay? Thank you. Question in the back.
Okay. Do we have all my questions? Oh, wait, hold on. We're going to go to the back first.
Okay, so I'm Rachel. Excuse me, I'm Rachel, and I do organizing in Florida, everywhere but Florida main places. But it's so important for you to understand the first start is organizing.
Mm-hmm.
It's coming together, and you can't be embarrassed. So I wanted to tell you guys one of the things that I did was I used the media. You got to be able to, even when the media don't come, then what you got to do, then you got to take pictures of yourselves and put it out in the media yourself. Like, there's certain things. So I have a question for the board. I know the answer, but this is going to help you guys. When there's RAD, when you receive that notice that's saying that RAD is coming around, let them know what are the steps they need to be taking as tenants.
Well, the first thing we did when we heard that RAD was coming is that we contacted Legal Aid. Now, I know that some organization across the country and Legal Aid doesn't have a good relationship, but we do. We have board members on there, and plus, I'm very pushy with Legal Aid. If you want me to serve on your board, then there are certain things that I need from you. And so I just negotiate while I'm on the executive board, so I can negotiate about what we do. But I know that doesn't happen. The second thing is that the National Law Project, we reached out to them to help to provide us some services. And then the third thing we did was we have radical people who don't know how to behave themselves. Okay? You know, there's some you just keep on the outside and some you keep on the inside, right? So we just call them and we educated them. And we have organizers who we just put on different color paper, we put bullet points. We just say, no rad, here's what it is, blah, blah, blah. And we just packed the room. We made sure that we had people who could be in every single meeting. We just send different people in every single meeting. And then we use the Harvard cost study to say, people were telling you back then that this is not going to work. And or we doesn't want to lose the land that our public housing is on. So that's what we did. It's in organizing. You're absolutely right. You have to organize.
We want to thank everyone. We don't have any, I have to abide by the time because there are other sessions that's going to be going on pretty soon, and we want to give people a chance to do bathroom breaks and get to their next session. So thank you, everyone, for attending this section of Tenant Power. And again, use your power. The word is power. It's power in all of us. And there's a chant that we say, when we fight,
we win.
When we fight,
We win.
when we fight,
We
win. Thank you all.
Yeah, check. So, I mean,